Thank you. Thank you. It is indeed a great pleasure to be part of this opening symposia of the RSSDI. I feel like the person who's standing on the other end watching Sachin Tendulkar bat because Dr. Shubhankar Chowdhury is the opening batsman, and he has pretty much set the stage and spoke most of the stuff that I was planning to cover. But I think this is such a new area, and there is so little in terms of clinical outcomes, in terms of what we know, that it bears some amount of repetition. So you should bear with me, and I would only be reinforcing what Dr. Chowdhury has already spoken so elegantly. My conflicts of interest are speaking on an area. Let's talk about something very old. This is, and Dr. Chowdhury talked about it briefly. So the sleep energy cycle is one of the oldest and almost permanent structure of cells. The alteration between light and dark and awake and sleep is fundamental to the metabolism of the body, right? And if you play with it, you get into trouble, which is exactly what human beings did. So these are mediated by energy and clocks that are present in each of these cells, and they create this balance between energy intake and expenditure. In fact, some of these are so fundamental that for example, photosynthesis is predominantly light-based, and we have evolved from that. And one of the reasons that sugar is so important for us is that photosynthesis end product is actually glucose, or sugar rather, if you want to look at it that way. One of the key ways that the body regulates this, and again, Dr. Chowdhury referred to it so much in his talk, is the ETC, the electron transport chain. For those of us who remember our anatomy and embryology and physiology, remember that there's an outer membrane and an inner membrane. And the fuel, either from the glucose cycle or from the fat oxidation cycle, causes movement of hydrogen ion across the electronic chain into this space. The same hydrogen ion is taken up to produce ATP from ADP. And remember, what is life? Life is conversion of ATP to ADP and back. From a biological perspective, that's all life is. It's not anything more, right? And how does it change? Now, just to take this thing about these metabolic switches, the way it has been designed is that the body uses either glucose or fatty acids, and each of those regulate each other, their own metabolism. For example, when glucose is high, insulin is increased and fatty acids are suppressed. Similarly, glucose pushes this whole thing into creating pyruvate that goes into the TCA cycle to create ATP. When glucose is not available and at very low levels, insulin is not present and fatty acids become operative. And fatty acids work through this particular thing that we all know about, this PPAR alpha. And then this actually stimulates this particular enzyme called carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1A. Remember this because it's going to be very, very crucial. And this causes the production of acetyl coenzyme A, which enters the same TCA cycle differently, but is not as efficient. Now, several things have happened to us. We have created a genetic advantage that we are, besides cockroaches, probably the most successful species in the world, right? One is by having less number of children, and the second is by having a larger brain. When you have a larger brain, you need more fuel. And more importantly, the brain is very glucose avid. It loves glucose. It won't take any other. It may take some ketones, but it mostly takes glucose. So whenever the brain needs glucose more, the rest of the body takes up fat, and therefore we store fat. And in fact, one of the things that always happens is, let us say we have an injury or we are in a bad situation, right? Our body reacts by inflammation. And that's also a time of starvation, so fat is broken down. So one of the things that has happened is that fat and inflammation go together, and we know that that is one of the causes of diabetes that I've talked about so many times. So what is supposed to be protective? That fat is dissolved when there is starvation and energy stress, and inflammatory cytokines are present. There is a protective mechanism that pushes glucose and maybe ketones to the brain, leaving fat for the rest of the body. But none of these adaptations were prepared for what we did. We did something fabulous or unfabulous in the last 100 years. We started eating more food more frequently. We changed the quality of food. We had processed food. We played with light. We played with our sedentary, with our physical activity. We played with sunlight. And of course, we started traveling across timelines. And of course, that led to diabetes, right? This is something that we know that there are people who, within the first year of diabetes is not controlled, have greater amount of complications. This is something that we know more and more and more about. So clearly, one of the ways to think about diabetes is to relook at its definition. Diabetes is a disease characterized by a failure in glucose homeostatic control. I sort of take this from Dr. Roger Unger, who talked about glucagon, but the same is true of mitochondria. This is, of course, Ralph DeFronzo's octet and of course 13 that we have. But the important thing is that these are causes of hyperglycemia, not necessarily what is happening in diabetes. What we now know is that one of the earliest changes that occurs in diabetes is an insulin resistance that occurs at the adipocyte, which is packing up all the fat. And two things happen. One is the presence of this insulin resistance causes a transcription of the monocyte chemoattractive protein 1, which causes the bone marrow to start sending in M1 macrophages. The other thing that happens, of course, is that adipokines are produced. This beautiful slide made by Suganami et al. In 2012 tells you that when these macrophages reach the adipose tissue, at some point of time, some of the adipocytes undergo apoptosis, and when they do that, fat becomes systemic. When fat reaches the liver and the pancreas and all the other places, the inflammation occurs there also. What we do know is that when you have diabetes, if you don't treat patients early, they develop complications. This is the medalist cohort of the Joslin diabetes, which shows that there are some people who develop complications, some who don't. Many things could be happening to them, but one of the things that we know is that it is hyperglycemia and its persistence and the rage and other products that probably cause these complications. I don't want to get into this particular slide, but chronic hyperglycemia does a whole bunch of things that cause complications. But one of the most important, we've talked about glycation in the past. I've talked about inflammation many, many times. But the important thing is the role of the reactive oxygen species, which becomes abnormal in diabetes. One of the earlier trials that looked at this was Ronald Engerman's trial, which showed about why diabetic retinopathy proceeds despite good glycemic control. What seems to happen is a coupling and the uncoupling of the respiratory chain. Remember, what normally should happen is that there is a little amount of reactive oxidation species that is released anytime. But when it becomes more, that's when the problem is. Normally, the hydrogen ion comes in and is important for converting ADP to ATP. But when the hydrogen ion starts leaking, that is when the problem occurs, right? And that occurs when lipids are used in excessive at the time when they should not be used. And when that happens, there is a particular group of protein called UCPs, or the uncoupled proteins that are present. And these increase, they do two things. One, they reduce insulin, but they also increase the reactive oxidation species, right? These are the three ones. Polyol increases, ages increase, there's exosomes flux. I won't spend too much time on it. But when UCP is produced, it causes excessive uncoupling. It increases the, it tries to reduce the ATP, and therefore there is a decrease in insulin secretion. That's one of the key factors for beta cell dysfunction in type 2 diabetes. At some point of time, this proceeds without glucose, that this uncoupling reaction creates what is called metabolic memory. This is a very old study by Serilli et al. That showed that, even after glucose is brought back to normal, there is continued reactive oxidation species and nitrotyrosine generation. It seems to be reversed with just vitamin C, but that was used in this particular study as it's an in vitro study, but vitamin C alone doesn't seem to work. What happens when you have gluco and lipotoxicity is what Dr. Chowdhury showed in this particular slide, is in these people, in these patients, over a period of time, remember there needs to be a definitive glucose control and this thing. The UCP production increases. The body is not able to switch between fat and glucose. So you have what is called a mixed bag of fuels, and the body is confused, and that leads to more dysfunction. My area of interest, and this is something I want to keep adding here, is this is where, when this happens, when there is reactive oxidation species that is increased, there is mitochondrial dysfunction that occurs. This particular protein called FOXO gets phosphorylated, and what it does is it goes into the nucleus. When it goes into the nucleus, it tries for some time to keep to suppress the fatty acid metabolism and allows the body to preferentially use glucose. But that can occur only for a short period of time. And at some point, and remember, those of you who are interested in, these are all the MODY genes, that FOXO works with these MODY genes. At some point of time, FOXO disappears and the body shifts to a balance between having both glucose as well as fatty acids. So this is where the metabolic inflexibility comes. It's not able to decide and say, look, I'm going to use just this. And when FOXO disappears, metabolic inflexibility occurs. At the same time, remember, in the pancreas, something else happens. That there's a signal that is sent when FOXO disappears. A signal is sent to the pancreas, the beta cells of the pancreas, to say, look, your survival is a trouble if you remain to be a beta cell producing insulin. Change, and it de-differentiates. So one of the things that seems to also happen is that when this occurs, there are epigenetic changes that occur in the mitochondria. That secondly, there is a reduction in mitochondrial dysfunction function that occurs in both healthy, as you become obese, and with type 2 diabetes. More importantly, the amount of ATP that is produced is much lower. The superoxide and the H2O2 ratio is also increased. So what seems to happen is the fatty acid is overloaded. There is also glucose that is available. The mitochondria is unable to divide itself and undergo fission. Also, if they have already mutations that occurs. Therefore, at some point of time, there is greater beta oxidation, reactive oxygen species, ATP is reduced, and insulin production also comes down. This is a summary of the pathways that occurs, but what I want to show you is something that is very important. That is that there is an increase in the epigenetic changes that are present in the mitochondria. These include histone modifications, miRNA production, and DNA methylation. And they ultimately lead, and because of these mitochondrial changes, there's a persistence of even if the hyperglycemia is resolved, there's a persistence of these changes. And they can lead to complications of diabetes and progression of diabetes that we saw in the medalist cohort. And as Dr. Shubhankar said, that this is present in all the organs. In fact, there's a lot of data on heart failure and mitochondrial dysfunction. In diabetes, there can be mutations, there can be mitochondrial swelling, there can be difference in fission. And as I said, the most important thing is there is a disrupted electron transport chain. And of course, ultimately, there is reactive oxidation species, all causing problems. Again, this slide was shown by Dr. Shubhankar. So how can you modulate this? This is an example of how you can do this from the endothelium. One is the most important way to modulate the mitochondria is to eat less. The greatest data that we have is on reducing the fuel intake. Once you reduce it, there's a key called hysteresis. Hysteresis is equal to metabolic memory. The only intervention that has been shown so far that reduces metabolic memory or even reverses it to somewhat is reducing the intake. If you can take a drug that sort of behaves like fuel restriction. But here are several ways. One is of course to work on drugs that work on SIRT1 and AMPK. There are drugs that work at the level of fuel enzymes, but the most important, and of course, there are metabolic modulators. The one that has been studied the most is resveratrol, but let me show you how else can it. So one is, of course, reduce the nutrient overload. And when you do that, it causes lipid loading of adipose tissue. It also reduces the energy expenditure, but ATP remains. But our current medications don't address this. Our current medications do not, whether it is SUs, SGLT2 inhibitors, while some people have talked about metformin and even SGLT2 inhibitor working at the mitochondrial level. Remember, SGLT2 works by AMP and by HIF2, where it actually improves autophagy, but it doesn't work at the level of the mitochondria. So clearly, we need drugs that work at the level of the mitochondria. And basically, these are called mitochondrial modulators. Where they do is they work at the level. They can correct the metabolic dysfunction at the pancreatic level, but also reduce insulin resistance. More importantly, these are drugs that improve the energy efficiency. Unfortunately, our progress in creating mitochondrial modulators are very poor. Although now it's nice to tell you that there are some drugs that are in clinical trials and probably impending to be published. One way is to use a cargo to bring the drug into the mitochondria. The second is using small molecules that will get into the mitochondria and, of course, use a targeting sequence. The third is using a penetrating peptide that works at the level of the mitochondria. These are the ones that have been traditionally people have been prescribing antioxidants, but they don't seem to work well just given as a pill, right? The second thing, of course, coenzyme Q has been used by a lot of people. Again, they don't work as a pill. PPAR agonists have a special role. But what now people are talking to is use this principle and sort of deliver these drugs into the mitochondria. The one that was looked at was Inglim. We haven't seen a future for it, but OXPHOS modulators are something that people have talked about. Dr. Shubhankar talked about oxidative phosphorylation, but OXPHOS modulators are very important. Second is one that can work at the membrane. The third, of course, and the most important is AMPK activators. There are analogs of metformin, analogs of SGLT2 inhibitors that will probably work. MCP1 inhibitors work by working at the level of inflammation, right? PPAR agonists, again, are one of our biggest bets because PPAR alpha is directly involved in lipid metabolism. In fact, data about using PPAR alpha as a mitochondrial modulator in ophthalmology is very, very huge. We haven't heard so much about its use in this. There are again novel drugs. I'm told that Torrent is coming up with a novel drug. In fact, that's one of the reasons they are into this particular symposium. So how do you work on this? One is you can improve the mitochondrial biogenesis, and the target is mitochondrial dysfunction. But ultimately, the ultimate effect is that it actually reduces progression of diabetes, may reverse metabolic memory, and there are in vitro proofs for this. So so what we would hope at some point of time is that these become better, and of course, they have clinical data that we are able to evaluate and show that these are in addition to what we do that reverses and probably confers metabolic flexibility. Till that happens, I think the most important way to confer metabolic flexibility is to eat less. Exercise improves mitochondrial function, but nothing works as well as eating less. To summarize, there's a continuum that extends from insulin resistance. Metabolic flexibility describes efficient switches in metabolic fuel depending on physiological demand. Mitochondria play a crucial role in determining flexibility, and this And there's a lot of progress that is going on at this point of time. And in a few years, we should be able to see some really good medications that are seeing daylights of clinical trials. I will stop here, and again, thank you for having me in this session. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm stopping the screen share, and thank you very much. Thank you.